And who do I need to upgrade to co-host?
Are you looking for who would present their PowerPoint?
Who's running the meeting?
Jordan has.
Okay, cool.
Is everyone ready with Zoom and eScribe?
I don't know about eScribe. I don't know who's doing that, but I am ready.
Great. We'll just give it a minute to hear from the eScribe staff. Okay, just checking one more time to make sure that eScribe is ready to go.
So they can hear you, but they won't be able to talk to you.
Oh, okay, good to know. I think we'll just go ahead and assume that we're ready to go then, and we'll get started. Good afternoon. I'm going to call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. Land Use and Planning Committee number 2 today. Our first item is roll call. Members present so far, we have Anderson is absent, though I imagine she'll be joining us. Becerra is present. Contos is absent. Harp is present. Hess is present. Jones is present. Merritt is present. Ramos is absent. Cheryl is present. Vasika is connecting and will be present. Van Lossberg is present, and West is present. We do have minutes to approve from August 5th. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. Kara, can you put the public comment slide up for a moment? We're going to, we take public comment on non-agenda items at this time. And so for anyone that's attending the meeting via Zoom, you can use the raise hand function, which is available both on the computer client as well as the iPhone and Android versions. You can, doesn't look like we have any phone participants. Anyone watching on YouTube or eScribe who wants to leave public comment is welcome to call and leave a voicemail at 406-552-6012. We'll also take comments by email and on a project-specific basis at engagemissoula.com. We have three items of committee business today. My apologies, the order is out of order, and we're going to take item 3.2 first. So I apologize for not communicating that to Mr. Dodson and his team, but we'll take 3.2 first, and then we'll do 3.1 followed by 3.3. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cassie for the staff report on 3270 and 3770 Mullen Road. This is the Mullen Crossing annexation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. So I'm Cassie Trepard. I'm an associate planner at Development Services, and I've been with Development Services about a year now. George Jensen, represented by Jason Rice of Territorial Landworks, submitted a petition to annex 2 parcels, address 3770 and 3720 Mullen Road, into the city of Missoula. The subject property contains 2 parcels fronting Mullen Road. The eastern parcel, 3720 Mullen Road, is intersected by Clark Fork Lane, which is currently located within a public access easement. The parcel to the north of the subject property is vacant. The parcel to the east of the subject property contains a bank and movie theater. The parcel to the west contains multi-dwelling residential, though it is not shown in this photo. And the parcel to the south of the subject property contains limited manufacturing, production, and industrial service uses. The subject property is adjacent to city limits on all sides. Per the city annexation policy, the city should prioritize the annexation of properties that would fill in gaps left by previous annexations that created islands and other types of non-contiguous boundaries. This annexation will fill in a gap left by previous annexations. Upon annexation, the subject property will become part of City Council Ward 2 and the Captain John Mullen Neighborhood Council. 3770 Mullen Road is approximately 0.79 acres. It contains an existing detached house. 3720 Mullen Road is approximately 3.5 acres and contains an existing detached house and 2 accessory structures. As far as legal descriptions go, the smaller western parcel is Tract 1 of Hauling Farms, and you'll see the larger parcel referenced in the conditions as a tract of land described in Book 128 of Micro Records at page 461. The subject property is located in Annexation Area A on the city's annexation policy map. The city should prioritize the annexation of properties located within Area A, which largely meet the guidelines of the city's annexation policy. The subject property is inside the urban growth area and the utility services area. Per the city annexation policy, the city should prioritize the annexation of areas located within the urban growth area and the utility services area. So the purpose of the annexation policy is to provide for orderly development, including the efficient delivery of municipal services to developed and developing areas and to protect public health and safety. The city annexation policy states that any annexation by the city should be guided by the current city growth policy. And then the city should prioritize annexations of areas that provide the same levels of service and infrastructure as other parts of the municipality, and prioritize the annexation of areas that meet current city standards, including but not limited to water, sewer, and transportation infrastructure. And then please keep in mind that the recommended conditions of approval are based on the requirement that the subject property provide infrastructure meeting current city standards in order to meet the annexation policy. The applicable regional plan is our Missoula City Growth Policy 2035, which recommends the land use designation of community mixed use for 3770 Mullen Road and regional commercial and services for 3720 Mullen Road. Areas such as 3770 Mullen Road that are designated as community mixed use promote the basic employment and services necessary for a vibrant community. High-density residential development, up to 43 dwelling units per acre, is also permitted in the zoning districts corresponding to this land use designation. Areas such as 3720 Mullen Road that are designated as regional commercial and services are for commercial uses that serve the needs of the broader region and often require large areas of land. High-density residential development, up to 43 dwelling units per acre, is also permitted in most zoning districts corresponding to this land use designation. The C1 neighborhood commercial zoning district, which is the proposed zoning district for both parcels, corresponds with both land use designations. Okay. The current county zoning that applies to 3770 Mullen Road is C-RR3 residential. This district provides for 4 dwelling units per acre density, single family and 2-family housing. The current county zoning that applies to 3720 Mullen Road is C-C2 general commercial. The requested city zoning upon annexation for both parcels is C1-3 neighborhood commercial. Staff supports this request as it aligns with the growth policy recommendation for this area. The subject property has frontage on one public right-of-way, Mullen Road, to the south, which is functionally classified as a minor arterial street. This portion of Mullen Road does not meet current city standards for a minor arterial street. Per the city annexation policy, the city should prioritize the annexation of areas that meet current city standards, including transportation infrastructure. In order to meet current city standards, staff recommends a condition of approval that requires the applicant to dedicate 25 feet of right-of-way, measured from the southern property boundary of the 2 tracts of land, and to construct half-street improvements meeting minor arterial standards for Mullen Road, adjacent to the subject property, subject to review and approval of city engineering. The improvements on the north side of Mullen Road shall include curb and gutter, drainage facilities, 5-foot wide bike lane, 10-foot wide landscape boulevard, a 6-foot wide sidewalk, and patchback to existing paving, as well as pedestrian crossings at Clark Fork Lane and Mullen Road. So after the staff report was submitted for your review, the applicant, Jason Rice, proposed some changes to the language of the conditions to allow for more flexibility. There are no changes to the right-of-way dedication width or the required improvements themselves, but Jason requested that the developer be able to guarantee installation of the improvements through a cost estimate, improvements agreement, and a financial security. City staff recommends that the right-of-way be dedicated within 60 days of approval of the annexation. We would like that ahead of time before the improvements are required. The improvements shall be constructed prior to the first building permit on either lot with frontage on Mullen Road, or within 2 years of approval of the annexation. An improvements agreement could potentially give the developer an additional year after the 2-year time limit, while still ensuring that the proper infrastructure will be constructed in a timely manner, rather than waiting for a building permit, which if something fell through could take a long time, and then we wouldn't get that infrastructure put in as a condition of the annexation. So Jason Rice requested this change to allow for more time to develop the property if needed. So 3720 Mullen Road is intersected by proposed Clark Fork Lane. The southern portion of Clark Fork Lane is currently located within an existing public access easement. The southern portion of Clark Fork Lane does not meet current city standards because it does not provide pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure on the west side of the road. The east side of the road does have an existing curbside sidewalk that's in good condition. In order to meet current city standards and the annexation policy, staff recommends a condition of approval that requires the applicant to dedicate 67 feet of right-of-way on the southern portion of Clark Fork Lane and install improvements on the west side of Clark Fork Lane adjacent to the subject property. The improvements on the west side of Clark Fork Lane shall include curb and gutter, 7-foot boulevard, 5-foot sidewalk, and 6-foot bike lane. And then the portion of Clark Fork Lane connecting that southern portion where you see there's no green area around the road on the picture to Clark Fork Lane on the property to the west is not currently constructed. And I'll be referring to this as the northern portion of Clark Fork Lane. In order to meet current city standards, staff recommends a condition of approval that requires the applicant to dedicate 61 feet of right-of-way on the northern portion of Clark Fork Lane and install full street improvements for this portion of Clark Fork Lane. The improvements shall include 35 feet back of curb to back of curb roadway, curb and gutter, drainage facilities, 11-foot travel lanes, 6-foot bike lanes, 7-foot boulevards, and 5-foot sidewalks. 3770 Mullen Road, legally described as Tract 1 of Hauling Farms, only has frontage on Mullen Road. Due to the proximity of the parcel to the intersection of Mullen Road and Clark Fork Lane, city engineering will not grant access to the parcel from Mullen Road. Access will need to be provided from Clark Fork Lane through the tract of land to the north. In order to provide access to 3770 Mullen Road, staff recommends a condition that requires the applicant to provide an access easement filed with the county clerk and recorder from Clark Fork Lane across the tract of land to the north for the use and benefit of Tract 1 of Hauling Farms, subject to review and approval by city engineering. Okay, and just as we saw with the Mullen Road conditions, the applicant would like to add language to the Clark Fork Lane conditions that allow the developer to submit a cost estimate, improvements agreement, and financial security to allow for more flexibility. The city would still like the right-of-way dedicated prior to the improvements within 60 days of approval of the annexation. Okay, and then here you see the same changes made to the condition regarding the northern portion of Clark Fork Lane. City engineering reviewed the conditions when we were looking at the amendments proposed by Jason Rice, and they recommended a change to the fourth condition regarding the access easement. They would like the language changed to require the access easement to be filed within 60 days of approval of the annexation. And this is to ensure that if the tracts are sold to different owners prior to development, 3770 Mullen Road will still have access. Okay. City Fire reviewed the proposal and will require the installation of a new fire hydrant to meet current city fire standards. Staff recommends a condition of approval that requires installation of a fire hydrant per the city fire approved hydrant plan, subject to, skip this guy, that's where we're supposed to be. Subject to review and approval of city fire prior to combustible construction. And that proposed fire hydrant near the intersection of Clark Fork Lane and Mullen Road. And the subject property is not connected to city water or sewer. New construction will be required to connect to both utilities. There's an existing water main located in Clark Fork Lane that extends from Mullen Road to the western property boundary of 3720 Mullen Road. There's also an existing water main located within the parcel to the west. And then there's an existing sewer main located in the southern portion of Clark Fork Lane. In order to meet current city standards and to align with the city annexation policy, staff recommends a condition of approval which requires the extension of a 12-inch water main within the Mullen Road right-of-way from the existing main in Clark Fork Lane to serve Tract 1 of Hauling Farms, also known as 3770 Mullen Road, subject to review and approval by City Public Works and City Engineering prior to building permit approval of the first structure on Tract 1 of Hauling Farms. Alternatively, the applicant could connect fire and domestic services to the water main and the adjacent property to the west if an easement is obtained and filed with the county clerk and recorder. Additional public utility infrastructure for water and sewer may be required at the time of building permit approval as determined by City Public Works and City Engineering. And we are giving the developer the option to provide that water either by extending the main or connecting to the main and the adjacent. Either way, Tract 1 of Hauling Farms will have access to water. Okay. Current city standards require landscape boulevards on the city streets. Boulevards are not required along the east side of the southern portion of Clark Fork Lane because there is an existing curbside sidewalk. In order to align with the city annexation policy, which prioritizes the annexation of properties that meet current city standards, which require boulevards, staff recommends a condition of approval that requires the applicant to prepare a boulevard landscaping and maintenance plan for Clark Fork Lane in the portion of Mullen Road adjacent to the subject property, subject to review and approval of City Parks and Recreation, prior to the first building permit on the subject property or within 2 years of annexation, whichever is sooner. And boulevard landscaping shall be installed and maintained per the approved boulevard landscaping and maintenance plan prior to the certificate of occupancy for each building permit. And per the city annexation policy, where appropriate, proposed annexation areas should be conditioned to join the Missoula Urban Transportation District. In order to comply with the city annexation policy, staff recommends a condition of approval that states the applicant shall petition into the Missoula Urban Transportation District prior to the first building permit on the subject property or within 2 years of annexation, whichever is sooner. Okay, state law allows a municipality to conduct a hearing on the annexation in conjunction with a hearing on the zoning of the property proposed for annexation. Title 20 ordinance outlines the 3 review criteria taken from state law, which may be considered for zoning upon annexation, and an annexation must comply with at least one of the criteria. So the applicable regional plan is our Missoula City Growth Policy 2035, which recommends a land use designation of community mixed use for 3770 Mullen Road and regional commercial and services for 3720 Mullen Road. The C1-3 neighborhood commercial zoning district corresponds with both the community mixed use and the regional commercial and services land use designations. So criterion 2C applies to this annexation request because it applies to zoning district that is in alignment with the growth policy land use designation for the subject parcels. Based on compliance with criteria 2C, staff recommends an annexation of the subject property and zoning upon annexation of the subject property to C1-3 neighborhood commercial, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. And then staff recommends that the Land Use and Planning Committee adopt a resolution of intention to annex and incorporate within the boundaries of the City of Missoula 2 certain parcels of land described as Tract 1 of Falling Farms and a tract of land described in Book 128 of Micro Records at page 461, we can skip that part, and zone the property to C1-3 neighborhood commercial, subject to the recommended conditions of annexation approval, and set a public hearing for September 14th, 2020. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cassie. I think maybe next we can go to Jason. Do you have a presentation, or do you want to offer any comments on behalf of the applicant before we do questions and comments?
Yeah, I'll just share a couple things real quick, and then we can take questions and comments from that, just to kind of get through some of the items that I've got here, if that works for you.
Yep, that works.
Can you see my screen? And
yes,
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so like you've introduced me, I'm Jason Rice with Territory Landworks, now IMAG. Actually, the developer who I represent is Brian Walker, and he's under contract to purchase the property, much like the last one you guys saw. You know, people don't just buy them at risk, they put them under contract. And so that just lays the groundwork for one of my small tweaks that I have to everything that we got. The one thing I would kind of mention is that I really appreciate that we were able to work on the timing. It really wasn't in order to get an extension to having to put the infrastructure in. The real, the main reason is that if it was conditioned that we have the infrastructure in before we can get a building permit, it could take us 6-8 months to do that through all the permitting and everything else we do. Then we can apply for a building permit. Well, it takes quite a while to get a building permit and design everything, and then it takes quite some time to build these buildings. And so, you end up causing quite an impact to that infrastructure. So if you can do it simultaneously with a letter of credit or a performance agreement, it allows us that flexibility to keep things moving. The 60-day for right-of-way dedication, I don't have a problem with the principle, and I understand why they're asking for it. The one thing I would say is that I would like it to be a little longer. If we can, considering that essentially their current agreement require, they're not going to close on the property for 30 days upon the annexation. And so that only gives us 30 days to get that right of way filed. The current landowner is really, they would let this expire if the sale doesn't go through. So I would want at least 90 days. I kind of would prefer that it was prior to, that one remained prior to building permit the way it originally was. That way that's taken care of before we even file for a building permit. But at the very least, I'd like to see that go to 90 days, if not 120. And I think it's also whether or not we take action on it versus it gets done. I don't know how long it'll take to go through the process of actually dedicating right away, since we're not filing a plat or a COS or anything. So that's just something to ponder as we go through this kind of slideshow, and then we can talk about that. But everything else has been good. As I've expressed to Jordan, it'd be nice to kind of understand this process a little bit better holistically. It's kind of felt like a bit of a, we were developing and almost designs just to get through an annexation, and the client has to know that it all pencils. And I kind of explained all that on South Avenue. So I just remind everybody of that as we continue to refine our annexation policy, it'd be nice to know the exact minimum that we need to do to get through that, because these buildings aren't set in stone yet. We do our best to get an idea of what we're going to do. But for example, the residential component could change depending on if we can get access to the movie theater and things like that, and they've been pretty non-responsive. So I'm going to go through this, and then we can discuss those items at the end. But Cassie did a great job of explaining, the background on the project. So that's what these two slides are. The one that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is just sort of the benefits of this project. And I think we probably all see it, but we have a stoplight right here. Hopefully you can see my mouse, but and we're going to extend this road through to an existing road that was designed and built for a future connection. And it's been quite some time that we've had this stoplight here that goes to nowhere. Meanwhile, people who want to kind of cross connect and avoid Reserve Street are forced to cross through on these 20-foot, 24-foot wide roads, to get their connectivity up to Home Depot or wherever they're going. So I'm kind of excited to be able to get this connection through as part of this project. I believe it kind of adds a lot to the community and the area and some of the issues that we've seen out there. When I was on planning board, we heard all about it. And I think this is one of the steps towards a solution for some of the problems that we've seen out there. I got to minimize or move all the pictures. So this is, where what we're looking at again is developing it. The zoning would allow commercial on both sides of the road. But as we kind of went through some of the zoning compliance that was needed to get through what are the needs for infrastructure for the annexation, we sort of switched gears and went to residential on the back. And what we have up front are 2 restaurant pads, and then a 2-story kind of commercial building. It could be a little bit of everything. But we have, and it's not we, but between all the commercial uses, about 70% of the square footage is committed to in a letter of intent. So that's why, getting into the building permit process quicker and sooner is better for us, because we need, it's been a while getting this done. COVID didn't help. And so the faster we can kind of get to developing these, the faster we can get to some economical development in the area. The residential probably needs a little bit more refinement. We had to kind of make a elevator with a connection here. Right now, we can't get a ladder truck in and out of this very easily. So we worked with the fire department to agree that we could get onto the building here, and then they can cross. This will be kind of a at grade on the roof line. So this is the solution we could come up with without going into full design. And so this may change a little bit, but it's still, access point won't change. And I think the coffee shop spot won't change. One thing I'd point out is I'm not really worried about the 60 days on this. We pointed it out a couple times, but this is an existing easement already that's for this driveway here. So I believe that's already in place. So that shouldn't be an issue. We'll confirm that. And if it's not suitable, we can file another one. But so that seems to be taken care of already. And but other than that, really it's kind of a nice parcel to develop when there's already water lines here. Sewer line is stubbed through. there's a water line that would likely end up here. Based on everything we've looked at, we just kind of doubt that we'll be able to get this, even though I wanted that flexibility. It'll be a cross parking agreement, just to kind of make the whole area work as a mixed use type project. So, it's real walkable, we have these patios, real accessible to the public and the community. I think it meets a lot of the Title 20 goals of having your buildings front on the roads and having a kind of more urban type feel to it. So, I do believe a lot of the stuff we've gone through have been changes for the better. We originally had the parking in front and things like that. And so this process has been good, I think, but it's been long, let's just say. So other than that, I guess I do want to just, open up to questions and see if there's any, explanation of why 60 days, 90 days would give us a little bit more flexibility. And just to make sure that the language is clear, we've been running into some of these annexation conditions or sometimes leave a little bit, we really want to fine tooth, make sure they're right so that when we get past this stage, it's very clear what we're going to do. So I want to make sure that 60 days applies to us submitting it to the Public Works to start the process and not that it's actually done, because that's a little bit out of our control without knowing how long it's going to take on that other side of things. I know that it's just tough right now with everybody working remotely. And so I just feel like we should try to build enough time into this that it makes sense. And so I don't know what the rush would be if we're not going to be able to build the infrastructure. But either way, that's the only really change that we have. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I think, Cassie, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think 90 days would be acceptable. We're just hoping to get that done before the improvements go in, just because, same with the 2-year part of the conditions, because something could fall through. It could be years before a building permit comes in. So we at least want that right of way dedicated, and then within 2 years to get those improvements, just in case, we didn't see a building permit for a very long time. And then just one more thing to add. When you get to the motion, please clarify if the conditions of approval are based on the amended ones or the ones in the staff report. But thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cassie. So I've got Heather and then Mirta.
So a couple questions. First off, is there a motion attached to this particular item today? I don't.
There's one in the referral and staff report. It's on page 2. There's a motion for today at the top of that.
Okay, all right, thanks. Jason, I don't know if you can reshare your screen with us, that final screen that showed the parking along with the reorientation of the buildings.
Yep.
All right.
Come on, there it is.
There it is, thank you. So I think most of us who look at this, and a lot of times we see, first off, that the parking seems to always take up more square footage than the buildings and the people inside of them. So can you first off tell us what the parking requirement is that you have to abide by for this particular project?
Well, that's a good question. The residential is definitely bare minimum right now. We prefer having a few extra above and beyond what zoning is what Brian has wanted to see on the residential, because it's just not been enough. On the commercial, we had to make some assumptions on some of the usages, but based on the restaurant pads, that parking use is really that high. I don't believe, I actually have Adam on the phone who's with Cushing Terrell. I kind of forgot to mention at the beginning. I honestly don't recall, but we did have a parking lot count that was based off of the uses that we have prescribed and the square footages. So I believe that these were based off of, some realistic assumptions for the uses and the square footage that we have. In fact, I don't know that like parcel B is going to be created by virtue of the right of way. We actually I don't think have enough parking there for the restaurants. So we created an easement or a cross parking agreement that will be filed with those building permits so that the two, parcel A and parcel B, will share it. I mean, we could aggregate the lots, but basically that entire parking is what we calculated.
So a follow-up to that, I often wonder, like, because of the use between residential and then and then commercial, even including restaurants, oftentimes they have parking requirements at different times of day and night. Is there potential to use cross parking, if you will, across all 3 parcels, A, B, and C, and actually reduce the number of parking spots that have to be built out, and creating a little bit more green space?
There is a possibility of that because it's within 500 feet of each other.
Mhm.
You know, that does start to create some conflicts. You know, like I said earlier, this layout is kind of what you'd almost say is at the schematic design, maybe even 60, 50%. So, I mean, there's opportunities to conserve. I don't know, it's something I'd have to talk to, our client and the realtor about, whether these uses would be okay with that. They have letters of intent already for the square footage as far as providing the parking, immediately adjacent. But I did intend to, because I think we were only able to provide the bare minimum for the residential. And like I said, we like a little bit more. So I intended to file a cross parking easement already for the residential onto the commercial. Just to make sure that they have enough overflow parking and there's not crowding and parking on the street where they shouldn't.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and
Yeah, go ahead, Cassie.
there are Title 20 that do allow for shared parking agreements between residential and certain commercial uses. So that would be possible if they wanted to follow through with that.
Okay. I mean, when I start to think about costs, parking takes up a lot of space and a lot of cost. So it might be worthwhile seeing if your pencil can make that kind of work.
Yeah.
And then my final comment, Jordan, rarely do we ever hear a developer asking for more time in a process. And I think in this particular case, it would make sense that we extend the time to at least 90 days. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Mirta and then Brian.
Thank you. I think my question is for either Cassie or Jason. As you know, this fits into the Mullen area planning project, and just curious to know how some of those elements have been incorporated here, and how I know we're not anywhere near adopting a form-based code, but how will this blend in with that process? And also public comment or participation. I didn't see any of that in the attachments. Just curious to know what the process was and if you received anything.
Well, I'll answer the
Yeah.
Mullen. Can I answer the Mullen master planning stuff first?
Sure.
Mirta, the boundary is actually all the way over here for the Mullen master plan, and this project's over here, and there's a fair amount of development in between. I would say, just based on my experience with what they were doing, that this would probably be something that Dover Coal would support, with the mixed uses together, the buildings fronting, we haven't even flushed out our storm drainage, and you saw limited green space. So we're going to have to try to get creative with that as well, which means a lot of the recommendations we made for stormwater will probably be applied here. So I do think that there will be quite a few principles from that, but it actually isn't really immediately adjacent to, so it won't really detract from that effort per se. So hopefully that helps, and I'll let Cassie answer anything else.
It does.
Yeah.
I think that even though it's not right adjacent, it's important to complement. I do think it will. So.
Yeah, and Jason is right. It has moved a bit away, but that, finishing out Clark's Fork Lane there will help with some connectivity to that area as well. And he is proposing mixed uses, which also aligns with the Mullen area plan. As far as public comment goes, notification letters were not required, but this wasn't posted on our new Engagement HQ page. And we didn't receive any comments for this project.
Great, thanks. Brian is next.
Thanks. So I heard no objection from staff to the 90-day. I wasn't sure if there was a clarification regarding Jason's question about, and I may not characterize it accurately enough, but it was the clarity around sort of submission, I believe. Jason, you might want to restate that. I just wanted to see if there was a need for any language clarification.
I would need to relook at Cassie's slide again with the red lines on it. But if it's, I would just want the language to say submit right away, dedication documentation within 90 days. That way, once it's submitted, then the city can take their time, take whatever time they need to get through the review. Likely this will be a spring build at this point, in the time frame that we're at.
So maybe what we could do is get this resolved between now and the public hearing. We could maybe have Jason and Cassie connect on exact language, and we could get a motion out of the committee today, if that works for everyone. So
we also have, I'm not familiar as much with the actual process for dedicating right-of-way, but we do have Troy Monroe here from engineering, and he may be able to clarify that process and what's involved a little bit.
sure, thanks.
So feel free to ask. Well,
Yeah, Troy, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, hi, Troy Monroe, Assistant City Engineer. Yeah, we agree with the process that Jason is proposing to just get the documents in within the 90 days and then let the process go wherever time frame is needed. So I don't know exactly what he has to submit. That's a survey question, but I'm sure they can do it.
Okay, thanks. Brian?
So if you need it, you need a motion, correct?
Yes, I do.
So I'm happy to recommend I'm happy to make an amended version of the amended motion with that amendment being 90 days as opposed to the 60 in the proposed amended motion. And I would just ask staff to work with the developer and provide any updated language as necessary to clarify what seems acceptable to everyone around submission.
Great. That motion is very clear and is in order.
I got a nod from Mary, which is like the highest compliment. So
great. Any additional discussion? Okay. Would anyone from the public like to comment? All right. So that motion, we have a motion on the floor, and I guess we can go ahead and take a roll call vote. Oh, it occurs to me that we learned earlier that committee staff can't talk into the Zoom meeting, so I will call a roll. Give me just a moment. Okay, Anderson?
Yes.
Becerra?
Yes.
Hart?
Yes.
Hess says yes. Jones? Jones?
Yes.
Merritt?
Yes.
Ramos is absent. Cheryl?
Yes.
Pasika?
Yes.
Von Lossberg?
yes.
And West?
Yes.
Okay, that is 10 ayes and 2 absent, and that motion passes. So we'll see this back for public hearing on September 14th, which will be a lengthy meeting. Okay, we'll move on to—
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. We are going to move on to or move back to item 3.1, which is the rezone of 508 South 3rd Street West to apply the adaptive reuse overlay. And I'll turn it over to Emily for the staff report.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Gluckin, and I am a planner with Development Services. Today, I will be presenting a request from Jesse Dodson of University Avenue Developers, LLC, to rezone the property located at 508 South 3rd Street West to apply the AR adaptive reuse overlay on top of the current zoning. The subject property is located in the Riverfront neighborhood south of downtown Missoula and is within City Council Ward 3, and it's within the McCormick Historic District, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The parcel is located on South 3rd Street West near Orange Street. It is approximately 6,490 square feet and currently contains a 16-unit multi-dwelling building. The property has frontage on South 3rd Street West and abuts an alley. The Missoula 2035 City Growth Policy recommends a land use designation of neighborhood mixed use, which encourages a mix of neighborhood serving commercial uses and medium-high residential density. The growth policy indicates that the B1-1 neighborhood business, B2-1 community business, B2-2 community business, and M1R2 limited industrial residential zones are zoning districts that align with the neighborhood mixed use land designation. Each of those zoning districts permit a residential density of up to 43 dwelling units per acre, which is the same density allowed by the current underlying zoning on the property. To elaborate a little bit more on the growth policy, the livability section of the growth policy outlines goals and objectives for historic preservation. These include encouraging the preservation of historic buildings, encouraging development that maintains or enhances the character of the community, and supporting sustainable development practices through historic preservation. The city growth policy also promotes a focused inward development approach that encourages new growth in the direction of existing infrastructure, neighborhoods, and public services through infill, increased density, and adaptive reuse projects. This focus inwards approach is in support of meeting the growth policy's goals of providing a sufficient supply of housing for a growing population in the city. The current zoning of the parcel is C1-4 neighborhood commercial, and it is also within the Design Excellence Corridor Typology 2 Overlay District. The C1-4 district requires a minimum of 1,000 square feet per dwelling unit on a parcel. The surrounding area includes a mix of C1-4, B2-2 community business, and RT 2.7 residential 2.7 2-unit townhouse zoning districts. Following the application of the adaptive reuse overlay, the current zoning would remain the same with the addition of the overlay on top. Properties surrounding the area, or properties in the surrounding area, contain a combination of commercial uses, single and multi-dwelling residential uses, and governmental services. The subject property currently contains a 16-unit multi-dwelling building that fronts on South 3rd Street West. The building has a parking area to the east side and the rear of the building that is accessed from the alley. There are currently 3 parking spaces on site, and 14 parking spaces are provided in a parking lot shared with the adjacent office building through a shared parking easement. According to a historical survey of the site, the existing building was constructed in 1909 and was used as an apartment building until the Thornton Hospital was established in 1917, and that's shown on the map on this slide. After the founding, doctors relocated to what would become the Community Medical Center. The building was once again used as an apartment building, and that use has been continued ever since. This survey determined that the historical integrity of the building has been retained for a number of reasons. One is due to the survival of the original design and materials of the building, the continuity of setting and location, and the building's representation of early Missoula architecture. Therefore, this survey concludes that the building would be a contributing element in the McCormick Historic District. Earlier this year, in January 2020, the Historic Preservation Commission approved a motion to add the building to Missoula's inventory of historic resources and voted to designate it as a contributing building to the historic district. These particular characteristics allow the building to be designated as what is known as a historically significant building. The applicant is requesting to apply the adaptive reuse overlay, which is intended to facilitate the adaptation and continuing use of these historically significant buildings in the community. The adaptive reuse district may only be applied to a parcel that contains an existing building, which meets the definition of historically significant building and must be for an adaptive reuse purpose. The Historic Preservation Commission determined that the parcel qualifies for the AR district based on the factors discussed in the previous slide, and based on the proposed project's conformance with the objectives of the overlay. These include the adaptive reuse of historic buildings, supporting city goals for historic preservation, environmental sustainability, and economic and community development, valuing historically significant buildings, allowing the conversion of existing building uses into new uses that maintain community character and extend the life of a building, reducing hazards and costs associated with new construction, and enhancing economic growth. The applicant makes this request in anticipation of increasing the density of the multi-dwelling building from its current 16 units to 22 dwelling units through an interior renovation of the building. Properties where the adaptive reuse overlay is applied may exceed the maximum density established by the underlying zoning district for the parcel, as long as the added density is allowable by building code. Parking is a factor that is considered with a request to apply the AR overlay and with a request for increased density. This table compares the calculations required for parking between the current scenario and the proposed scenario. Title 20 requires 1 parking space per each dwelling unit under 850 square feet. So with 16 units, 16 parking spaces are currently required, and that would increase to 22 parking spaces with 22 units. As I mentioned earlier, 17 parking spaces, both through the on-site parking spaces and the 14 provided through a parking easement, are currently on site and are planned to remain in the proposed scenario. The project is eligible for 2 parking reductions through incentives in zoning code. The first is a parking reduction for transit served locations within the design excellence overlay. The standard allows the off-street parking requirement to be reduced by 15% if the project is within 1,250 feet of a transit stop with an adequate level of service. The property is within 1 block of a Mountain Line bus stop for Route 7, so it's eligible for this reduction. And through this reduction, the parking requirement may be reduced by 3 spaces, which is 15% of 22. The second reduction is available for landmarks and historic districts through Title 20. This allows the zoning officer and the historic preservation officer to approve exceptions and waivers to off-street parking requirements for contributing buildings in National Register historic districts. And the historic preservation officer has indicated that she would approve a parking waiver for this project. Title 20 requires that existing developments address only the new parking requirements as part of an expansion rather than rectify current parking that is lawfully existing but may not meet today's zoning standards. So in this case, with the application of the parking reduction, the total parking requirement is equal to the amount of parking currently provided. Therefore, requirements for new parking are not triggered. Staff examined this application using the review criteria for rezoning requests and found that first, the rezoning implements the focus inward, historic preservation, and housing goals of the city growth policy. Second, that the rezoning facilitates the adequate provision of public services, including transportation, water, schools, parks, and other public requirements, because the area is inside the urban growth area, the sewer service area, and is currently served by water, sewer, motorized and non-motorized infrastructure. Third, the rezoning promotes compatible urban growth by creating urban infill without adding stress to existing infrastructure and facilities, promotes the continued preservation, maintenance, and general welfare of a historic building, and is contextually appropriate given similar uses and similar building types in the area. Fourth, the rezoning will promote public health, public safety, and general welfare by retaining residential uses in an area that has access to sewer, public water, emergency services, streets, bike lanes, and other urban services. And finally, the rezoning gives reasonable consideration to the character of the district. A public hearing was held on August 4th for this item with the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board. Planning Board voted 8 ayes and 0 nays in favor of the recommended motion to approve the adoption of an ordinance to rezone 508 South 3rd Street West to apply the adaptive reuse overlay, and this was recommended without conditions. During the hearing, the board discussed first some concerns that were raised from a public comment regarding increased parking demand tied to an increase in density. And the board also discussed limitations on hours of use that are stipulated in the existing shared parking easement. Several board members expressed that this project is a representation of the intent of the adaptive reuse overlay to promote historic preservation and create housing through adaptive reuse. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of the rezone request to apply the AR overlay with the following motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. On behalf of the applicant, would you like to say anything, Jesse, or anyone on your team?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter. I know that Don MacArthur, our architect at MMW, was on, but I think he had to drop off, but he's involved with this as well. You know, that was a very comprehensive presentation that Emily gave. I don't have a whole lot to add to it. We did recently close on the purchase of this building. We're very excited about it. We're, you know, out for bid on some of the work that we'd like to do to restore this building to, you know, what was probably its former glory. We haven't really been able to find any actual photos of what this building used to look like, but like Emily said, it is really substantially in the same format that it was, you know, in its original construction, to the point where there are even, at some point, there were more than 16 units in this building. There are actually more doors in the hallway than there are units, and there are a number of units in the building that have more than one front door, and you'll have like a sofa or something in front of one of the doors. So I don't know what the floor plan originally looked like, but it was not the format that it's in now. There were certainly more units at one point. We've come up with a plan that is 16 very well, or excuse me, 22 very well laid out studio apartments. Most of the units in the building are one bedrooms at this point. But you know, we're looking forward to it, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Jesse. And I again apologize for the agenda shuffle. I should have notified you a little earlier. Apologize for that. So I got a few questions. Julie Merritt first, and then Heidi West.
Actually, I think that Mr. Dobson just pretty much answered my question, but I was curious how you were going to go from 16 to 22 units. So would it be accurate to say we're basically taking one bedroom apartments that might have multiple rooms and changing them all to studio apartments that are basically one room living type situations?
That's correct. The floor plans on floors 1 through 3, there are 4 basement units that won't change. But on floors 1 through 3, it's a stacked format today. So every floor plan is essentially the same. And it's, there's a wide central hallway. And on each side of the hallway, there are 2 units on each floor, 3 units on each floor today. And we'll be making those into 4 units on each floor, basically, to add 6 units.
Great. Heidi.
Thank you. First of all, I think this is a really exciting project, and it's the first kind of adaptive reuse overlay that we've seen since creating this tool. And so my questions are more about this tool broadly than a specific project. So my first question is,
Heidi, we lost your audio.
Is it working now?
Yes.
I think I fixed it. Okay, so my first question is around, since this is an overlay, this stays on this. This is tied to the lot itself and not the project. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, and then my second question is about how impact fees are calculated for a project that sees an increase in, I guess, density, but not an increase in the actual footprint of the project.
Are you aware, Mary? I'm not sure.
I am not aware, Mary McCrae with Development Services, but we'd be happy to research that and get you an answer before the public hearing on Monday. So this is a pre-public hearing information.
Thank you, that'd be great. And then I just have a general comment that I think it would be great to specifically call out our zero waste goals in the presentation, and how the largest contributor to our landfill is construction and demolition materials. And I think that in addition to obviously meeting historic preservation goals for our community, this tool also allows us to meet additional goals, and I think this is a really important aspect of projects like this. So thanks.
Anyone else from the committee have any questions? Okay. We do have a meeting attendee, and so I would take public comment at this time. Okay, and it looks like we have Ralph Leonard. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself and give your comment now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my wife and I own the property directly behind that building. And I think it's just a bit naive to think you can add 6 people to a place and not have a parking problem. She works down there. She lived down there for decades before that. And the parking on 2nd Street is relatively filled. And, so you're thinking these people are all going to come and not bring a car. And if they do bring a car, where are they going to park? On Cottonwood or 2nd? Because it's going to be one of those 2. They can't park on Orange and they can't park on 3rd. And people will bring cars. So the density, you guys have got all the facts and figures on that, but I'm down there every day and I'm here to tell you that during the day, 2nd Street is filled. So, and there's a couple businesses down there. They have a little bit of off-street parking, but not much. And, we call the police already for parking problems. She has a handicap spot out front that gets filled all the time. So, you're not even addressing that. You're just making this thing of, oh, we'll put this adaptive use overlay into place and people will just not bring their cars, or magically these spaces will appear. I don't get it. And I think it's going to end up creating problems. It's going to end up, certainly we're going to be calling the police more, or the parking commission, if there's no place to park out front. So, I mean, you aren't even talking about it here, and maybe it'll come up in the next meeting. You know, it's just got brushed over by the presentation. And I think it's an issue, and I think it's probably an issue in other areas in town too. So, you know, I would please hope that you guys think a little bit about that or consider that, because you're going to be hearing from me and my wife when those 6 people start parking out on the street, and whoever owns that building, they're going to be hearing too. Yeah, thank you. I'm done. That's all. Thanks.
Jordan, you're muted.
That's why that's why no one was responding to me. I was going to say thank you for the comment. And one thing about our public hearing process is that you know, we're not going to be substantively expressing opinions until after the public hearing. So you know, you know, appreciate your time and you coming down to make the point, and it'll certainly go into the consideration after the public hearing. Okay. Anyone else from the committee wish to have any? Does anyone have any questions or any non-substantive comments? Okay. I'm going to make a comment just about the tool. I think this is the first time that this tool has been applied locally or has been proposed to be applied locally. And I just learned during our budget presentation that this tool is one of the first, I think, first 5 adaptive reuse overlay tools in the country. So I just wanted to highlight that. I thought that was pretty interesting. So, okay, well, I guess this is pre-public hearing, so it's information only. So we will have a public hearing for this on September 14th, and we can go ahead and move on to the next item. Thank you, Jesse and Emily.
Thank you all.
So we have, does anyone need a break? Let's take a recess until 1:30, and we'll be back at 1:30. All right, we'll give everyone just a minute to filter back in and then we'll get started.
Naturally. Fertility treatment followed and Breck was born.
All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Here with our double header this week, we have Dave DeGrandpré back for the Heron's Landing annexation of tracks 1 and 2 of certificate of survey number 5963. This is the Heron's Landing subdivision, and Dave DeGrandpré is here with our staff report.
Good afternoon, councilors. I'm going to share the screen and do a brief presentation. All right, great. Well, I hope everyone's doing well. Hopefully we can get you out of this committee meeting a little earlier than scheduled. This is a proposed annexation and initial zoning of property located in the Mullen Master Plan area. And this is an action item for you today. The subject property is located north of Mullen Road, south of Broadway, or West Broadway, I should say, south of the 44 Ranch. It's 72.11 acres in size. You can see that George Elmer, which is a plan collector, bisects the property north to south. Over on the left side here as well, the west side, that's Chuck Wagon Drive, also a plan collector, sorry about that. You can see the city limits are adjacent to the property to the north. In addition, the two main roadways, George Elmer, again on the east side, and Chuck Wagon on the west, are also, they have already been annexed into the city. They're 80-foot rights of way that have been annexed into the city limits. The subject property, you can see toward the lower left-hand corner in the red circle, is within annexation area A. That's an area in the city's annexation policy that is recommended essentially for annexation. It's an area where it's been determined that city services can be provided and it meets the other criteria of the annexation policy. In terms of the growth policy designation, the growth policy looked at this area and provides a recommendation of residential medium density development with 3 to 11 units, dwelling units per acre. There's also that the hashing that you see, the lines that you see refer to it's an urban agricultural type overlay. Although, you know, when I looked at the growth policy, tried to understand what that meant, there aren't a lot of teeth to it. It doesn't seem to, it's put on there, and I guess I wasn't involved with the growth policy, don't understand quite why. I know that there are important soils, significant soils in the area, but I don't know that the hashing actually signifies anything other than it's agricultural land, or at least was historically agricultural land. Current zoning, it's currently in the county, the property, it's currently zoned CRR1 rural residential, which has a development density of 1 dwelling unit per acre. It's a restrictive zoning, but the property is not zoned for agricultural use. It's zoned for residential use at a rural county scale. The proposed annexation zoning is RT 5.4. And so RT 5.4 is a single and 2 dwelling type zoning. It allows individual standalone single family type structures and also 2-unit townhouses, and has a minimum lot size of 5,400 square feet. So it's an urban scale single family type district. There are some other elements in the project. This is a bit of an aside, but I just want to get you excited about what's coming your way. So I thought I'd let you in on a little bit more information. There are several pieces to this project, and we're at the first stage. So the first stage is annexation and initial zoning. The applicant has also requested that the city amend the zoning to allow what's called a neighborhood character overlay. So it's an overlay district that would be put on the base RT 5.4 zoning that would provide for, I'll go into the details here on the next slide. But in any event, it's a multi-stage process. So it's annexation, initial zoning, adopt a new neighborhood character overlay to your zoning menu in Title 20, then apply this neighborhood character overlay to the subject property. And there's also a phased subdivision that's coming your way that the planning board just heard last night. And then ultimately individual phases would come in over time to be final platted. Just regarding the neighborhood character overlay district, what the developer is proposing is to create a district that would have certain architectural features, a certain mix of lots, certain configuration of lots. So smaller lot sizes and setbacks than would be normally allowed under the RT 5.4. Lots fronting on a common area that have alley access could be oriented toward the common area. This is different from normal zoning. In standard zoning, lots are oriented, the front of the lot is on the street. In this case, what they're hoping to do is develop some lots that are facing each other across kind of green space or common areas for a different style of development, more community-oriented cottage style. They also have some architectural features that are proposed in this zoning. For example, that each lot has to have a main entryway, and it has to face the street unless it fronts on that common area like I just mentioned. And probably the main difference is that in the RT 5.4 zoning, there's a maximum of 2 attached dwelling units. And in this case, they're hoping for, in certain locations of the development, to have up to 6 attached. So 6-unit townhouses in specific locations within the development. Here's a quick glance at what the subdivision proposal looks like, what the preliminary plat looks like, 347 lots. Again, you can see on the, on the east side, this is the main collector, George Elmer. And on the west side, this is another collector. And then in between are lots of varying sizes, interconnected street network. Right in the center is a 4-acre park that they're proposing. And there are some other features that you'll see here shortly, but I just wanted to give you kind of a quick glance as to what that looks like. And then the development is proposed to be platted, final platted in up to 10 phases over a period of potentially up to 20 years. And so the way that under Montana law, the phasing process works, there's a phased overall development plan like this right here in the preliminary plat that would go through a review process. Again, last night it went to the planning board. The planning board did recommend conditional approval or preliminary approval subject to, I think it was 27 conditions. And so this will come to you here shortly. When it does, if it gets approval, then the developer will be able to submit each of these individual phases, and it'll be an abbreviated review process. This is kind of the more intensive review process, the subdivision phase, and then the phases individually, we will look to see if any of the rules changed or there might be any impacts that weren't anticipated. But essentially, the idea is to get overall approval at early in the process, and then the developer could come in with an abbreviated kind of submit phase by phase, and it'd be a quicker review. Go back to the annexation and also the subdivision. There are over 20 proposed conditions of approval. I'm not listing them all here. Just want to give you a bit of a flavor. What I'm recommending, and the planning board also recommended, was that the streets be built, of course, to city standards, that George Elmer and Chuck Wagon, which are the collectors, be built to collector standards, and that the internal streets would be built to a local street standard. They all have sidewalks, boulevards, landscape boulevards, et cetera. It's a urban scale type development proposed to connect to city water and sewer. The parkland and other common areas would be maintained by the homeowners association, and that would be administered through covenants. There'd be sidewalks and trails, petitioning into the urban transportation district. And then this property is within the airport influence area. So there's a disclaimer or statement that needs to be shown on the plat, essentially advising potential lot purchasers of the location of the property within this area. I know that WGM Group, who represents the developer, they're on today. I know that as we move forward, they've already suggested some changes to some of the conditions, but I don't think we need to worry about that just yet. We'll get to, at the staff level, we'll get together with WGM and then try to see what we can work out, and then we'll come back to you with final conditions at your next reading.
Dave, can we interrupt you with questions, or do you want to hold those till the end?
Whatever you like.
Okay, Heidi?
Sorry, I had a question on I think it was 2 slides before, and I was trying to pull it up so I could look at it, but I don't think this is attached yet. One more back. There was a feature. What is kind of underlying the subdivision layout? There is that squiggly line that's under those lots. Could you just say what that is? I didn't recognize it.
Are you referring to this down here at the bottom?
No. So there's like above the curve of the park.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Like, what is that?
That's an irrigation. That's an irrigation ditch. It's the Flynn Lowney irrigation ditch.
And that ditch is that underground or above ground?
It is currently above ground. So I'll point out to you, do you see the lots in gray that are shown as W7? Okay, so this is the Flynn Lowney irrigation ditch it's a sizable irrigation ditch, maybe 10 feet across, 15 feet across, something like that. It serves one downstream user currently. The lots there, I think the developer, they were trying to figure out what to do with this ditch. And what they did was they platted these W7 lots over the top of the irrigation ditch. These lots are undevelopable as it currently stands right now. They would be the last phase that could potentially be developed. There's correspondence in the application between the irrigation ditch company and WGM Group. There's talk of potentially abandoning this ditch, filling it in, and platting lots at some point in the future. That's far from certain. And so I think it's kind of a placeholder. They're just putting these lots, calling them a phase, and we'll see what the future brings.
So I think I would like to just kind of earmark this subject, maybe to come back to in the future, since this is part of that larger development area. And I think this has much of the irrigation access to this area. And if there's future agricultural use in this area, even if it's not in this particular site, I think this is a conversation we need to have between this and Grant Creek. So I just want to put a placeholder on it.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a few more questions in the queue. So we have Heather and then Brian, and then we can carry on with the staff report.
Thanks. Dave, I think it was page 11. I could be wrong, but if you could go there. Okay, so this has just caught my ear because now it's the third time today in land use and planning meetings that we have this discussion around petition into the Missoula Urban Transportation District. And I'm wondering if staff could just speak to how easy or how difficult that process is so that I have a better understanding as it applies to all projects that may come before this body.
Mary McCray, are you available? Maybe you could answer that question. I'm not familiar with the process.
Mary McCray with Development Services, they just fill out a standard form petition and have it notarized and signed. We send it to Missoula Urban Transportation District and it gets filed and they get added to the tax district. So it's a very straightforward process. So they just have to fill out the form and provide it to us to meet this annexation condition. And then we provide it to MUTD and they take it from there.
So just to be clear, it's not necessarily the residents of that area that have to meet a threshold of a minimum of a percentage that would want to petition into the district?
No, it's just this landowner petitioning this subject property into the district.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Brian?
Thanks. Appreciate Heidi's question, and thanks for the details, Dave. I was wondering around the irrigation ditch. You mentioned some correspondence in the application. Is that in our attached materials? It is. Okay. I will look for that. And real quickly, it's not obvious to me. I'm not as familiar with that area. Which direction is upstream or downstream? I think you mentioned one downstream user, perhaps.
Yeah, upstream is to the right. It's to the northeast.
Okay.
Downstream is to the southwest.
Thanks.
Okay, Amber?
I just want to follow up on what Heather was asking about, just for a little more clarity, because I think it was me that asked about that earlier on the Grant Creek one. With the urban transportation district, so the developer, owner of the property files a petition, but what are the threat? I mean, how does that play in with actually getting public transportation out there, and what thresholds need to be met? Like, I mean, are they just put in, what does that mean to be part of the district? I guess I don't completely understand that.
I don't
Mary
have a sense of it, Mary.
Yeah, Mary McCray with Development Services. I will have to, I mean, I have a general understanding. I know there are properties that are taxed in the district, and over time, per the Missoula Urban Transportation District Plan and Mountain Line Plan, as densities are reached, bus routes are added, you know. But I think Vince Carusto, we could see if he can provide some comment about that and explanation before the public hearing or before the LUP on the subdivision and rezone, and we can get that information to you.
And I'm going out of my lane by answering this a little bit, but I think it's important to recognize that the presence of the transit district generally confers a benefit on people who live in the region. So, you know, the fact that there are buses running, you know, Bolt buses running every 15 minutes between downtown and North Reserve and the mall and the university, that has a system-wide benefit of reducing impact on the rest of the community. So even if someone lives in an area that's not directly served, you know, they obviously have park and ride options or other types of options, but they do have a benefit by being part of a system. And to me, I mean, I view it the same way that I have a benefit of being part of a school system, even though it doesn't directly impact me as someone without children. But I mean, I view it the same way, where it's, you know, it's a community service, and by being in that district and contributing to that district, it is conferring a benefit on our community that is really important. So that said, I also think it would be great to get Mountain Line in here to talk about their long range plans. I know that in the Build Grant area, they do have some plans to further expand into this area at some point in the future. Nick, you were flagging me down too. Did you want to add anything?
You know, just for a second, I always wanted to be Ryan Salisbury, but I'm really not. So Nick Kaufman with WGM Group. So, you know, we're part of a society, And we have laws at the state of Montana that govern different things like our transportation districts, and Mountain Line is a wonderful amenity to our community, and they've adjusted things and they're trying to provide better services to higher density. That service will come out to the other areas as we achieve densities and thresholds. But because of the way state law is written, when we bring in projects like this one in subdivisions, for years now, we've always annexed into the urban transportation district before final plat. And the reason for that is to get this land as a placeholder for future service. And so if we try to extend service, bus service after an area is populated, it becomes very political and very divisive. And it just doesn't fulfill the overall future goals and objectives. I mean, the city of Missoula has invested in the extension of sewer out here and water out here. In 2002, they adopted the grid system road pattern. And now with our first build grant, we've got community investment in the transportation infrastructure grid system. And so the urban transportation district needs to be part of this growth. And this is really the most opportune time and the most efficient time to address it. Thank you.
I appreciate that. That helps me. All of your comments help me understand that really it's a placeholder for the future, and that they'll start paying into that. I would love to learn more about Mountain Line's plan anyway, but that kind of helps me understand how this is used and why it's important in this piece. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to also add that to the extent, I mean, it certainly is a placeholder for the future, but it also is, even if an area never received transit service, that their life going about, traveling about our community would be easier and better. And I know that there are areas of our community that are in the transit district that don't receive direct fixed route service, but they do receive that benefit, and they're also eligible for paratransit service. So if they're unable, if they have a disability that prevents them from using regular fixed route service, they could have door-to-door or curb-to-curb service depending on the circumstances. So the entire district is eligible for that as well. So Mirta and then Gwen.
Thank you. I have a completely different question. Mostly, I just want to know where we can find public comment on this. I know that I have received some from my constituents, but as it was mentioned earlier, the attachments to this, I think are in the wrong folder. So I'm just wondering how we can get access to what has been conveyed by the neighborhood council or leadership team or just residents in the area.
Okay, well, I'll take a look and coordinate with the development services administrative staff and make sure that we have public comments. We've received several, 15 or more. So I'll make sure that they're available to you in eScribe.
Gwen?
Right, I wanted to get some information. I know that the Mullen master planning process has been taking place and is pretty far along. I assume this geographic area is within that planning process. The Mullen master plan is not yet finalized, but I'm curious as to what it recommends for this area, what overlap there is, and what this is veering away from in terms of what that master plan is recommending.
Well, I am not intimately familiar with the Mullen Master Plan, but I have done a little bit of research on it and just wanted to talk about a couple of different things. First of all, the idea of vesting. And so this subdivision application was, well, before I started working for the city of Missoula back in 2019, the developer approached city engineering and to determine whether sewer and water could be provided. And there's a letter in the file from, I believe it's June of 2019, it might be October, but I think it was June, where city water and sewer said, yes, we can serve the development, which I'm sure triggered lots of activities on the developer's end and engineering and that sort of thing. So, but maybe more germane or more kind of legalistic is when a developer submits a subdivision application, there are several steps in the review process. The first step is we view it to make sure all the elements are there. In other words, all the pieces are in the application itself. Once it's determined that that's the case, then we move on to the second stage, which is the sufficiency review. And we determine whether the applicant or the application is of sufficient detail, has enough information, addresses all of the subjects well enough for us to determine whether it complies with the rules or not, to make a decision or a recommendation on it from the staff level. Once the application is deemed sufficient under Montana law, the rules that are in effect at that time are the rules that govern the subdivision essentially till the end of time. And so this subdivision is vested under the current subdivision regulations from 2010 and also current Montana code annotated from 2010 regarding phase subdivisions. But addressing your comment a little bit more. So in looking at the Mullen Area Master Plan, we were looking at last night, actually, the planning board. It includes a sketch for this area. I don't have it up right now, but it basically calls out residential development in this area. It calls urban scale, of course. It has some differences are some of the streets in this development are more curved, and while the Mullen Master Plan shows, its sketch shows a more grid, traditional grid type pattern. The Mullen Master Plan also shows a greenway along the irrigation ditch in the kind of right up in this area. And here they've decided to concentrate their parkland more to the center. And there are some other parkland areas as well that I don't have on this slide, but you'll see it shortly. So there are some deviations and quite a few similarities as well. So, but I'll try to address that in greater detail when the subdivision comes to you.
Great follow-up, Jordan? He nodded his head. I'll go ahead.
Fumbling with mute. Go right ahead.
Thanks. And I do understand we've got a snapshot in time, and that is a separate process for the Mullen Plan Road, or the Mullen planning process. But I guess something I'd like to hear more about at the hearing is my understanding that a great deal, and it kind of touches on what Heidi was getting at. There was a lot of attention paid to stormwater drainage and how that will interact with Grant Creek and other areas in Mullen Road. I don't know if this ditch is part of the analysis for stormwater or how that all works, but I guess there is this holistic plan that's looking at water in general in that entire area. And I'm hoping that this dovetails with that to a degree, would just be great as opposed to not dovetailing at all. So thanks for your answer. And if there is more information regarding it, I personally have not been able to, I haven't yet looked closely at the Mullen Master Plan and where it's at. I just know that a lot of attention's been paid to that. So I'd appreciate it if there's more information regarding that. Thanks.
We've got one more person in the queue, Heather, and then let's move on and get through the rest of the staff report, and then we'll let Nick have an opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant as well. Heather?
Actually, my question is going to be for Nick after his presentation. So.
Okay, great. Okay, so Dave, you want to carry on?
Yes. Let's see. So back to annexation and the initial zoning. So under Title 20 and also Montana state law, there are certain criteria that you have to determine whether proposal meets the criteria. And there are three specific ones. Does the annexation authorize land use comparable to land uses authorized under the county zoning classification? In this case, the answer is sort of. And you only have to meet one of these, by the way. So it's sort of. Yes, residential is what's allowed in the county. This proposal would allow the RT 5.4 residential would also be a residential district, but at a more urban scale, more urban density. Letter B, does it authorize land uses that are consistent with the land uses approved by the Board of County Commissioners or County Board of Adjustment? Again, it's pretty much yes, because it's residential, but then most importantly, and I think most accurately in this case, most pertinent is C. Would the zoning be consistent, annexation and zoning be consistent with the land use and zoning recommendations for the subject areas as set forth in the growth policy? And you might recall that map, the growth policy map that I showed toward the beginning of the presentation, yellow shaded, that showed that the area has been designated under our Missoula 2035 plan as being appropriate for residential development at a density of 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre. The development plan that we have that WGM has submitted for this subdivision has a density of 4.8 dwelling units per acre. So it is in compliance with letter C here. It's in compliance with the growth policy. And then finally, the recommendation of staff is to adopt a resolution of intent to annex and incorporate within the boundaries of the city of Missoula, tracks 1 and 2 of certificate of survey 5963, and zone the property RT 5.4 residential, and set a public hearing on September 14th of 2020.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Nick, do you have a presentation or some comments?
You know, Jordan, I would yield to your advice on this. I can pull up the slideshow and just show you some slides and talk briefly about the concerns that the planning board had, the neighbors had, and just briefly what we're doing for design. But I think what Dave has presented is probably sufficient for your decision today, but tell me what works best for the committee.
You know, I think just given the future decisions that are coming on this with the subdivision and everything else, I think it would be useful to see that now. Just, you know, so everyone has a full picture. And we have the time today, so we may as well if you're able to do that.
I'll try to hit the highlights. So I'm going to share my screen, or attempt to. Okay, so I'm the senior planner on this, and Ryan Salisbury, who's actually with me today, is the lead engineer on this. Kate Dinsmore is the landscape architect, and Dustin Hover is the engineer. So this is our view of George Elmer Drive. So George Elmer Drive needs to be integrated in.
Nick, I'm going to interrupt you quick. If you go up to the display settings in the PowerPoint and switch and click switch to switch the right next to it to the left of where you are. Display settings, yeah, you can switch the two monitors. We're seeing the presenter view, which there you go, swap presenter and slideshow.
You're pretty good at it.
Perfect.
All right, so away we go. So we designed this as a place. It involves planning, it involves annexation, zoning, subdivision, and phasing. These are the guys who are doing the project. They've got great experience outside of this community, but in this region. They've done a bunch of things over in Idaho. You know WGM Group and what we've done. MMW was part of laying out the lots and the different land uses for the lots and the different home sizes. So primarily your growth policy calls for 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre, and we're doing 4.8 dwelling units per acre. The planning board really wanted to see some higher density. The neighborhood wanted to see less density. We're providing for an owner-occupied product. There will be no large apartment buildings in this project at all. I'll show you that in just a second. We do a curvilinear layout instead of a grid system because it controls traffic better. If people can see a long ways on a straight wide road, they tend to increase speed. We like the curvilinear option. And there's a lot of connectivity inside the project. So I'll focus on this for just a second. So the things we had to integrate into the design were George Elmer right here. So George Elmer is a collector street. We could turn our back to it. There's all kinds of things we could do, but we're gonna widen the easements here, and we're gonna put a meandering trail likely on both sides of George Elmer Boulevard and enhance the boulevard landscaping and bring residential right up to the street. Alley load. We're going to put parking on the street too, because in good urban design, that parking along with the street trees on the boulevard buffers the impact of that collector street to the residences that adjoin it. By the same token, we're not bringing any alleys out onto George Elmer. We have one road intersection to allow George Elmer to function as its intended use and the public investment to get this over to Broadway. Similarly, Chuck Wagon is another north-south collector. And we're trying to be sensitive to the neighbors who have 1 acre tracts over to the left. These are our largest lots, and they're about 8,500 square foot lots. You probably won't see lots this big ever platted in a subdivision in Missoula again, because it just simply doesn't meet our ability to meet workforce housing in our community. But this was done as consideration for buffering the neighbors. They don't like it. They would like half-acre lots there. But if we take out the lots, we're taking out potential houses for firemen or for policemen or for healthcare workers or for the children that we've raised to adults in this community. So there's a trade-off there, and you guys will get to make that. The Central Park area is really important. Parks and Recreation has a park up in 44 Ranch that they maintain. We wanted a park because it's central to placemaking and central to where people's paths can cross in a community. So this will be a common area that's operated by the Homeowners Association, with a portion of it specifically designed for agricultural use and community gardens right here. So the outdoor activity area and the frisbees and the baseball happens here, and gardening can happen there. I apparently didn't emphasize that enough at the planning board last evening because they had concerns about that we didn't adequately address the impacts on agricultural land. We'll talk about that more Monday. The irrigation ditches are part of our agricultural heritage. They cross the whole urban area. They also are out here where we are expanding into our Mullen Road area in conformance with our Missoula and in conformance with the 2019 land use update that Missoula County did. So if this irrigation ditch stays viable, it's wonderful. It can flow through here, and there's adequate easements so the ditch company can maintain that irrigation ditch. If it should ever go away though, it can be a wonderful location for homes, all right? So our more dense housing, our 6 units per townhome, are the dark brown along George Elmer in a couple of locations, and in one location in Chuckwagon, again, trying to maintain a buffer between those existing residential uses. And then these are the homes that front on common areas, access off of alleys. This provides wonderful security for an aging population and young families. Kids and toddlers can play out in this area right here. People are watching them right off their front porches. You saw a bit of this design when we did Hellgate Village. We do have some longer blocks. There's no streets over on the east side of our subdivision, so we've put homes there. And we've asked for some variances from block lengths, but we've created these wonderful greenways that go all the way through the project, sort of east-west this way, right? And that's also used to break up our blocks so that people can move off and outside of the street system to get to the central common area of the subdivision. I'll just spend a minute on this because these are the housing typologies. So these lots are the largest single family, 160 by 55, followed by patio homes, followed by single family alley loaded homes, followed by the cottage courts. So all of those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 products are all single family intended for owner occupancy. And then we have some duplexes in the Hershey chocolate, my favorite color, which are over here and over here. And then the row houses, which have up to 6 dwelling units per building, front porches, all the entrances face the street. I'm just about through, Jordan. I think Dave mentioned to you the phasing plan. This is important transportation system. So not only are the sidewalks on both sides of the streets where you see the dashed red lines, but we have a larger 10-foot wide shared use path that goes diagonally through the project and gets us from the Mullen Trail system through the development and up potentially to the school this way, if they can ever get an easement from McKinnon's. If not, it goes up around Flynn Ranch this way, again, past the central common area. The proposed neighborhood character zone Dave talked about. These are some views of historically how it grew. There's the Bill grant. So this is an important one. So Gwen and other council members, Mirtha, talked about that. So this is what the Mullen Road plan looks like. I just showed you what ours look like. So one of the big differences is that here's the city park in 44 Ranch. This will be our common area park. This neighborhood needs to have a central gathering place, just like this neighborhood has one. And so we're gonna put a central park that allows also for gardens there. Our roads are curvilinear, and the Dover Cole roads are more of a grid system pattern. They just show this is lotted area. We've added some diversity in here as well. but trying to do neighborhood building. So both the plans are really congruent. And Gwen, our engineers, Ryan Salisbury, contacted city engineering back in June to work with them on storm drainage and other infrastructure. We actually submitted the subdivision in November of 2019. Now I'll go over some of the concerns that were raised last night, just because I think it's important to talk about the issues that neighbors have. So first of all, the planning board was concerned that we were trying to slip something by in terms of a development and miss the Dover Coil, Missoula City County Land Use Plan. That is absolutely not the case. We started this project working with the city over a year and a half ago, and we've been working on it since November of 2018. We've been working diligently to provide great design, working with MMW architects and our experience in the neighborhood to come up with a really good plan. And we're not trying to slip anything by anybody with this, nor are we in a hurry to try to beat something. That's just absolutely incorrect. Traffic is always a concern. You guys are doing a great job. You have the 2002 grid system road pattern. You're investing city dollars as well as bill grant dollars to make connectivity between Mullen Road and Reserve Street. There's concern about lot sizes. But, you know, folks, we just can't do 1 acre tracts anymore, and we can't even do half acre tracts anymore. We simply don't have the land for that. And that is an impact to agriculture because we're not maximizing the use of the property. Snow plowing, we have boulevards throughout the project, and that'll allow for snow storage. There's concern about parking on George Elmer Drive, but George Elmer Drive needs to be integrated as an urban collector street into a residential neighborhood. And we won't affect traffic flow on George Elmer one bit with the designs we proposed. There's concern about the safety issues of the irrigation ditch. Heidi and I think Gwen talked about the agricultural importance of that ditch, and we have no disagreements with that. But we don't know that putting people on a walking path along an irrigation ditch is the best choice. Ditches, especially this ditch, is incised, deeply incised with high banks, and you can't see what happens inside that ditch from the side of it. We think the walkway works better through the development, adjacent to the park, where there's eyes on the walkway and eyes on the park also. Bus stops will be integrated at the recommendation of the Urban Transportation District. There's a roundabout planned at part of 44 Ranch. That'll probably happen with bill grant funding when George Elmer gets connected to West Broadway. Flynn Ranch has a bunch of homeowners associations instead of just one. 44 Ranch has a single homeowners association, so do we. So that's easy to coordinate. We'll install the improvements in the common areas and the initial recreation equipment. The homeowners will take it from there. There was mention by folks at the public hearing that the school district's overcrowded and they can't handle these children. The school district did not send us a letter, but in working with the school district at Hellgate Village and other projects, they just added on to that school district and they have capacity. Doug Reisig also has new numbers in terms of the number of children that come from households, and the number is way down. We'll share that with you on Monday night. I don't know, Dave, if you remember some of the other things. Oh, wildlife. So the planning board was concerned about mitigation for wildlife. And, you know, we've got the R Missoula 2035 growth policy. We've got the Mullen Road plan that's coming, that's allowing for open space and reclamation of Grant Creek. And quite honestly, where we've invested, you guys have invested as a city in sewer, water, streets, grid system roads, master planning on 2 levels, and now the Mullen Road one. We need to have a place for people. And when we develop an urban setting with street trees and we bring in homes and shrubs and gardens, we allow wildlife that can adapt to an urban setting, and it adapts really quite well. So we may be displacing raptors that feed on Columbian ground squirrels and field mice in that field. But we're replacing it with something that we need as a community, and this is part of our build inward area. So I believe we have adequately addressed the concerns about agriculture and wildlife. I think we're bringing you a great design that's congruent with the planning effort you're doing on Mullen Road, both in terms of infrastructure and land use. And with that, I will cease my presentation. Thank you very much for your patience.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Okay, I have Heidi in the queue for a question, and then Heather, if you want to do yours then. Okay, Heidi, go ahead.
Unmuting always takes me a little bit. So I guess maybe this is a request to Mary for the public presentation. I think it would be super helpful to have kind of that broader plan for this area that's included in this presentation. I know, you know, the one that shows where the future potential agricultural uses are in this build area. And I think this ditch is super important. I did water quality sampling on Grant Creek last year for the county as a citizen scientist, and the lower part of the stream that I sampled was the ditch, because there is not, Grant Creek doesn't on its own flow into the Clark Fork anymore, and so abandoning this ditch, I'm glad that there's, you know, alternative designs for it to be in place or not to be in place, but I do think that this is a critical bit of infrastructure that we just need to address more fully. Maybe not in this particular project, but it's super important.
Heidi, are you asking that the presentation on this project include more information about retaining the ditch, or?
No, I think
what exactly?
So Tom just gave a presentation to the new local food, city county food policy board that just showed a, you know, grand schematic of this area that included, you know, I guess the dream package of agricultural land and future uses. And I think it would just be helpful to see, I realize it's not finalized in any way, but I think it would be helpful to see this project in that context. So literally just including that drawing.
Okay, so Dave can include a drawing of the Mullen Plan area, but he will, you know, have to make it clear that this project is, since the Mullen Plan has not been adopted and this project was deemed sufficient under current regulations, it's the current growth policy that applies, as well as the.
Right, and I think this project doesn't veer significantly from any of those goals, but I think that larger context would be important for people to see it in.
Okay.
Heather?
Thanks. Nick, the last time that I recall you coming in, and I'm not going to talk about 4th Street, but in particular Hellgate Village, one of the things I really walked away learning a lot about was that segment of the market called the missing middle, and that housing type. And you haven't mentioned that today. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to kind of what the vision is of the type of buildings that are going to be going in for residences.
So I think my microphone's still on. I apologize, Jordan. I'm not sure what you heard in the background there, but I hope it wasn't too bad.
There's nothing embarrassing.
So you know, we are contemporary. So one of the best projects, we give you a number of really great projects. So we gave you Hellgate Meadows. I think
Hellgate Meadows, thank you.
Well, Hellgate Meadows is the one that's been there since 2002. Hellgate Village came along, and that was a design by Opticos, and Opticos wrote the book called The Missing Middle. It's a really good book, and we actually have that in our office. And we think the philosophies that are there are really important. And so as we move from each project to project, we learn. And when we add different personnel to a project, like in this case, Don MacArthur, and his skills in terms of a variety of different housing types, and we bring people from the outside in, which is what Teton Land Development is. We can bring all those together into a team and try to create a neighborhood which encompasses those. So the missing middle concepts from the Opticos design, from what we learned in our contemporary literature, not just that one, are included in the design of this project. And again, when we put a common area in the middle, that's a 4-acre common area, And we design it and shape it so that the agricultural use of it, or the community gardens of it, don't interfere with the activity space we're actually doing design, right? We don't need frisbees going through the through the garden area, and we don't need spoiled tomatoes going over into the ball field either. So that common area in terms of how society functions and how people function, especially in the face of COVID-19. And, you know, we're not prophets here at all, but when we use good elements of design and we bring people's paths together so they cross, right, that creates the social fabric, that creates and builds neighborhood. It's not coming home, raising your garage door, automatic opener, putting your car in your garage, closing the door, right? An opportunity to move through your neighborhood, to watch children play, watch old people walk down the sidewalks. I'll raise my hand on that. I can still go down the sidewalk. It's creating space. And so that philosophy is here. This is to provide workforce housing, but also higher end housing. So what's happening to us in our housing market is the lower end homes that are coming on the market are being snapped up by the folks that want more expensive homes because there aren't any. And so they're buying the $240,000 home for $35,000 more than asking price, and it's not available in that housing ladder. And so we're providing a range of housing, from the ones you see on the common areas that face into those common areas to the 6-unit townhomes, right? As well as some of the medium-sized lots to address across the board the market, the missing middle of the market, and a little of the upper end of the market, because they're snapping up all of the housing that comes on for lower income and missing middle in our market right now.
Just a couple of follow-ups. And so in terms of, I appreciate that there's going to be a spectrum of housing stock coming online. What percentage is the target that is going to fall into that missing middle element?
You know, Heather, that's a really good question. And rather than speculate that, let me see if I can answer that for you when we get to the public hearing.
Okay.
That's a great question.
And then finally, speaking to your couple of mentions of how we just can't afford to build 1-acre lots anymore, or even half-acre lots. So as we look at a lot of other neighborhoods that are being asked to step up and take up more and more higher density, how does Teton justify the 5.4 lots versus reducing that even down to 2.7? Did that question make sense, Nick?
Well, so when I think of density, I think of adding units increases density. So if we're at 4.8, or call it 5 to round it up, growth policies at 11, we would have to double the density in here, and we would come into some important neighborhood considerations. We've got half-acre tracts in Tipperary to our east. We've got 1-acre tracts in 44 ranch estates to the west, and we've got the 40 and 60-foot wide lots in 44 ranch to the north of us, right? And so what we're doing is we're bringing some innovation into the neighborhood with this, and we're bringing pockets of density, and we're asking for a neighborhood character overlay for a couple of reasons. One is we need to get those 6 units in a townhome instead of 2, right? So there's trade-off both ways. And I don't know if I've answered your question, Heather, and if I haven't, just ask it more specifically.
I appreciate that. It's just, I think this is the crux of the problem that we face, is that more and more people continue to want to call Missoula home. 60% of population now is 1- and 2-person households, and we're building bigger square footage houses. And I'm not saying this project falls into that, but in general, that has been the norm. And I'm just wondering, how does this particular project move us in the direction of where we can actually offer smaller square footage homes for sale, so that that segment of the population who wants to downsize or get into home ownership for the first time has the opportunity without having to buy more land when they don't really need it nor want it?
So that's a great question, and we take this really seriously. So when we did Canyon Creek Village out on Expressway, 25-foot wide lots, 110-foot deep with alleys, right? What we were accused of is creating a slum. That's what we were accused of, right? But we spent a year in educating people about Canyon Creek Village. Drive out there. Make it a homework assignment. Drive out there and tell me what you see. You see people in craftsman style homes with front porches, with furniture on their front porch, and people walking down the boulevard sidewalk, and a park where all the homes face into the park. Not half of them back up to the park. They all face into the park. And it's got a large multifamily component up near the interstate, right? Okay. But it took education. To this day, Hellgate Meadows, the people that live in Hellgate Meadows love Hellgate Meadows, right? But when they talk to us, they go, well, the streets are just too narrow, right? And it seems to be a little too dense. Well, excuse me, I'm sorry for that. But you don't have people speeding in your neighborhood and you were able to afford your house, right? But we could have taken care of all those things and you wouldn't be living there, right? So as we come to this neighborhood and we bring in elements that aren't in the neighborhood, like the cottage style homes that Dave talked about, which front on our common areas and alley load, that's a new concept and that's increased density. 6 attached dwelling units, GASP, that has been translated through neighborhood interpretation to be high density multifamily, right? So what you know is if you live in a mobile home, you truly believe that you don't. You live in a 2,000 square foot home. If you live in a 2,000 square foot home, you really think you live in a 6,000 square foot home. This is how people's values work. We have to work, Heather, within those values because we're in a political system, right? I need to balance wildlife. I need to balance agriculture. I need to buffer from this neighborhood and buffer from that neighborhood. I need to meet the community goals and objectives, right? And I think
Absolutely.
this is a fine balance in our opinion.
And I really appreciate you taking the time and explaining that to us all. Thank you.
All right. I don't have anyone else in the speaker queue. Does anyone have any questions on the annexation before us? Okay. Dave or Brian, go ahead.
All right. So I think I'm just highlighting what Mirta highlighted before, but I want to make sure I was tracking it. So the public comment in eScribe appears to be, there is public comment attached to eScribe, but it appears to be associated with the Expo Parkway project. So I think that's the cleanup there that needs to happen. Is that consistent, Jordan, with your or staff's understanding?
At a quick glance, it appears as though there's a few that just got maybe added to the wrong one. There's a couple public comment items on here on the Heron's Landing one for Expo Parkway. And Brian, you saw the opposite was true?
I was scrolling through the ones for Heron's Landing, and unless I'm mistaken, I think all of the public comment, at least all the ones I looked at, were all in relation to Expo Parkway.
Okay. Okay, we will take a look at all that. So since this is a resolution of intent and it's setting a public hearing, I think that it's probably worth noting that we can proceed and consider all of that comment in the public hearing phase, if everyone's comfortable with that. Okay. Stacy.
So we are setting a public hearing for the 14th of, I guess, and maybe Brian already touched this upon this several agenda items ago. Well, all of a sudden I'm feeling the sense that September 14th is starting to stack up for quite a land use night. I just wanted to make sure that
we have 5 large land use items that are currently scheduled for September 14th. We are working with, we've already scheduled 2 special council meetings. We are working to maybe schedule additional special council meetings. I think we need to give that a committee, and and then perhaps between now and Monday, or between at some point where we can intercept this, maybe we might need to look at a second special council meeting that week or something. But it is the development services staff is very aware of the amount of projects coming this way. And I don't know, Mary or Dave, do you want to add any more to that?
Visiting me too.
What's that, Dave?
It feels busy to me too.
We just, with the pause in COVID, we have folks who've been waiting a while. We have been understaffed. We're moving projects forward as quickly as we can. I wasn't aware of when we first set some of these schedules, which are like a couple months in advance, of the idea of having a public hearing and then you hold it open for final consideration. So that made it look much busier than my original intention when we set these schedules. But the subdivisions as well, they have statutory deadlines, and we don't really have control when they're deemed sufficient and how many days out, and trying to combine very complicated projects that include annexation, zoning upon annexation, rezone, and subdivision, and get them into your council agendas. So I apologize for how many we have on the 14th. We would have had some on the 7th had that not been a holiday, but that was the other problem. And then when we scheduled, we asked to have some of these on August 31st, but that is going to be a council meeting, but I think you're dealing with the budget. So I get it. There's just a lot of things in front of council at this time.
And I will absolutely work with Brian and with administration on, whether or not we need to maybe consider an additional special meeting. It could be perhaps that Wednesday, the 16th or something. And I think, we do have some items that are where the public hearing will be closing and some where the public hearing will just be opening. So it's also possible that we could do something kind of innovative around how we do the staff report or how maybe some of that, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of innovate as far as how we actually deliver that meeting on the 14th to make it a little bit more streamlined for public hearings that we're just opening or something.
And I would recommend that we have advertised for the first public hearing on all of these. So that's the one I would hold. As you open the first public hearings, if you want to have the final consideration at a different date, then you can announce that on the night that you're having the first public hearing. So we have some flexibility there.
Great. So we'll just, I know it's an issue, and we'll just work through it the best we can. Thanks for flagging it, Brian.
Yeah, just to weigh in on all of that, and no apology necessary, Mary. We understand the situation. I think what I would ask folks to pay particular attention to is this issue of we've gone to a practice for good reason of holding public hearings open unless otherwise advertised for a week because of the pandemic. When I think through something like, if we wind up being slated for final consideration, for instance, on Expo Parkway on the 14th, it strikes me that right now we have final consideration after public hearings, and I'm not sure that's the best approach. I would ask folks to think about that one specifically. If we've had something open for a number of weeks, we might want to be taking action on that first before opening public hearings on other items. It's just a suggestion. I could be wrong. And what underlies that is just a sense that if we have several public hearings open, especially if there's a substantial amount of comment, and then we are deliberating on a decision on final action, I would argue that we don't do our best work at the end of very long meetings. So probably said enough. We've made it more complicated with the holding open of things for good reason. And I just wanted to highlight that that's got to be part of the equation.
And if I could add one thing, on the 14th, 2 items are on their final consideration. That would be the 508 South 3rd Street West rezone and the Expo Parkway. You could possibly move one or both of those to the 16th, and then you have the first public hearing on 3 items, Mullen Crossing annexation, the 601 West Broadway rezone, and the Heron's Landing subdivision, annexation, zoning upon annexation, subdivision, or rezone.
Okay, great. Well, we will we'll get together and we'll try to figure out the best path forward. And thank you everyone for being flexible on this. So I guess we still need a motion. Is there anyone who would be willing to make the recommended motion? Sandra.
This is to set the public hearing, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, I will make the recommended motion to set the public hearing.
Okay, so it's to adopt a resolution of intention to annex and then also to set a public hearing.
Okay, I'll do both of those.
Okay, great. That motion is in order. Is there any additional discussion? All right, seeing none. Note for the record that there are no attendees in the meeting right now, so there was no public comment. If anyone's listening and wants to provide public comment asynchronously, you may call and leave a voicemail 406-552-6012, or by email or at engagemissoula.com. So we've had a good discussion here, and now we can take a vote. And I'm going to just call the roll. Anderson.
Yes.
Becerra.
Yes.
Contos is absent. Harp.
Yes.
Hess votes yes. Jones.
Yes.
Merritt.
I abstain.
Merritt abstains. Ramos is absent. Cheryl.
Yes.
Basika.
Yes.
Von Lossberg.
Yes.
And West.
Yes.
If that motion passes 9 ayes, 1 abstention, and 2 absent. And that's all we've got today. So we will be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave, Mary, committee members.
Thanks, Nick.
You will get your weekends back someday.